Hi, this is Kelly from The Truth in Story, and today we're going to be kind of looking at the question of why Lenormand. I'm going to assume that most people who are going to be watching this video are not people who, as their core base reading tool, use Lenormand. So more than likely the people who would be watching this already have some experience with tarot or oracle cards and are interested in learning the Lenormand system. And so I thought, since I'm going to start a series on Lenormand, I thought the next step would be just sort of to look at the question of, why learn Lenormand? What's it going to offer that's different than what you might already have access to? So I thought, and the first thing I would like to cover, just so that everybody's on the same playing field, because different people coming to this video may have different levels of experience with the different cards, and so I thought we would just touch on each of the cards and what they are. So in a sense, so here I have a deck of tarot cards, a deck of oracle cards, and a deck of Lenormand cards. Now, in a sense, these are all oracle cards in that they are a card system that is being used for oracle purposes. I do apologize, any noise you might hear in the background. It is coming up on 4th of July weekend in the United States, and so there is quite a lot of fireworks being going off. So I have all the windows shut, but it's still quite noticeable. As I was saying, in a sense, these are all oracle cards. These are all systems using cards that are used for oracle purposes or divination purposes, however you might want to call it. That's what the purpose of the cards are. So in a sense, they're all oracle cards. But in the sense that we use it today, we're going to be just taking a quick look at tarot, oracle cards, and then Lenormand cards. So when we look at the tarot deck, this is a very specific oracle system of cards, and it is composed always, in order to be a tarot deck, it's composed of 78 cards. There are 22 major cards and 56 minor cards. The minor cards are further broken down into 4 suits of something along the lines of swords, wands, cups, and pentacles. Sometimes you'll have things such as staves for wands, or rocks or coins for pentacles, but it's somewhere along those lines. And those 4 suits stand for the 4 elements, or are connected to the 4 elements. So we have swords for air, we have wands for fire, we have cups for water, and we have pentacles for earth. The minor arcana, each suit has number from ace through 10, and then has 4 court cards that are something along the lines of pages, knights, queens, and kings. Sometimes you might have prince and princesses, queens and kings, but it's going to be somewhere along the lines of those 4 court cards. So in a very small nutshell, that is how the breakdown of a set of tarot cards is, and that is what makes it a deck of tarot cards. So it is a very specific system with old roots, and the card meanings have very specific traditional meanings. That doesn't mean that people don't go off from them and kind of do their own thing. They do, but the essence or the roots of our of the whole tarot system are very specific, and they do have certain meanings for each of these cards. And so it is, to repeat myself, it is a very specific system that is set up. In order to be considered a tarot deck, it needs to be set up along these lines. Now, there are different traditions within the tarot system. There are 3 systems that are still in use today, and this information I got off of a link that I will put you in the description box below from Benabel Wen's site, and I think some of this information is also in her book Holistic Tarot. So there are 3 tarot systems in use today. The Marseille, which is around from about the 1440, again, this is just as general as that they can get. The Rider-Waite-Smith, which is what I'm holding here in my hands right now, which is around 1909. And then the Thoth, or Toth, I think I've heard it, deck, which was from 1969. The Rider-Waite system, which is probably the most popular today, and many decks come off of this, and this is certainly the system or the tradition that I read from. So this is very heavily influenced by numerology, Christian symbology, some Roman mythology, Egyptian mythology, Western astrology, alchemy. There's all kinds of things that are correlated within the Rider-Waite-Smith. The Marseille system, and I could be pronouncing that incorrectly, is very heavily based on Roman Catholicism as well as Judeo-Christian I don't know why I keep saying symbiology. Judeo-Christian symbology. And it's very helpful with that system to have an understanding of the Renaissance, the European Renaissance. The Thoth incorporates geometry, some Eastern philosophies such as Taoism, and a lot of the same other-ish things that are found in the Rider-Waite-Smith. This is, again, just a really broad overview that there are 3 systems to tie in with the tarot, but they all are tarot decks that all incorporate 78 cards, 2 splittings of the major and the minor arcana, and having the minor split into suits. Like, these are all similar, so it's a very specific system. Oracle cards, or as we come to, again, these are all oracle cards, but as we come to think of oracle cards today, oracle cards are different in the fact that there is no set system. So every deck that you get can have a completely different number of cards. You might have 36 cards, you might have 56 cards, you might have 90 cards. You can have all different cards, and each of those cards, you know, generally are numbered, but they're numbers. So the number 3 card is not going to be the same as the number 3 card from a completely different deck. There is no tie-in to the various decks. They are complete systems in and of themselves within that particular deck. Sometimes they're based on a theme. You might have an angel oracle deck that has all different angels on it. You might have, like I have a Kuan Yin oracle where all the cards are based off of different aspects of Kuan Yin. You may have like this particular deck is the Sacred Rebel, that is very much based off of sort of a feminine divine energy. You might have a Goddesses Oracle deck that is all based on goddesses, various goddesses, and in each deck will come with a guidebook, which is quite important because, you know, that deck is completely inclusive of its own and has its own inherent meanings and its own inherent system. And so that would be the difference between a tarot deck, which has a long tradition and a very set structure, and across these different, you know, even though, you know, I can pick up a different deck that's based on the Rider-Waite system, and while it might have a different theme to the look and the images, the cards are still going to be very similar and very recognizable as a tarot deck. That's not the truth. That's not the same with an oracle deck. You can't just pick up and, you know, learn, let's say you have the Sacred Rebel, you really get to know this deck. You can't then go pick up another oracle deck and think that that knowledge is going to transfer, because it won't. It's a completely different system. So that's what an oracle deck would consist of. A Lenormand deck is similar to a tarot deck in a way, in the fact that there is a very specific system that is involved. Now there is a Grand Lenormand, I think it's called, that's 54 cards, but that's a different system than this particular one. That when we're talking about Lenormand, for the most part, we're talking about the Petite Lenormand, which is a 36 card deck. And we talked a little bit about the history of that in the previous video in this series, if you want to look at that. But it is a German-based that had then also spread due to a card reader in France dying. It was capitalized on, and a deck was released as if it was her deck of cards. And so we ended up having sort of a French connection there, which is why we have the name. But this is a very specific system of 36 cards. And each of the cards is numbered and has a specific image on it, and very often will also have a playing card associated with that particular card. Well, it always has a playing card, whether it's showing up on the card itself. It has to do with the actual deck that you get, but there is a playing card that is associated with each of the cards. And each of the cards in a Lenormand deck are going to be the same, and that the first card is always going to be the rider. Now, there are certain thematic decks that do change some of the particular names, such as the Celtic Lenormand is to have a coffin, because the Celtic people would not have used coffins, so there is a burial mound. Other changing, I think there was a ring instead of a ring. There's hand fasting because they didn't exchange rings. So there are some thematic changes in certain decks, but the very essence of the card remains the same. Number 13 is going to be the child. Number 11 is going to be the whip. Number 9 is going to be the bouquet. 19 is going to be the tower. You know, this is a very set. Any deck of Lenormand cards that you pick up, other than minor thematic changes, if you're getting a good deck, in terms of if you want to read traditionally Lenormand, these are going to be the same cards. So it is a very specific system. In the system of Lenormand, a single card on its own doesn't really exist. There's not so much a sense of, I mean, I say that everybody can use these cards the way they want to use these cards. So if somebody wants to pull one card and gather a bunch of meaning from it, that's certainly, you can do whatever you want with your set of cards. But in terms of reading it traditionally as it was intended, you need to have a set of 2 or a set of 3 cards in order to read it. So, and that is very much inherent in the system of Lenormand. The grand tableau, where you lay out all the cards, which we'll get to in a minute, is an inherent nature of the Lenormand system. So in many ways, the Lenormand is tied closer to tarot, just in the sense that there is a very specific system in place. Now, there are 2, as we talked about, there being 3 sort of traditions that are currently running with tarot: the Marseille, the Rider-Waite, and the Thoth or Toth system. There are traditions in Lenormand, and the 2 major, there are various ones, but the 2 major systems would be the German system and the French system. Now, the cards are going to remain the same. So unlike there are name changes, there's some name changes with cards throughout the different systems, although they are fairly close. In terms of Lenormand, the different traditions have more to do with the card meanings than it does for the actual cards, because the cards, you can pick up any deck of cards and this is going to work in any tradition. It comes down to the meanings of the cards, the traditions behind the meanings of the cards. Now, I read primarily off of the German system or the German tradition. And some of the major differences there with the German Lenormand system, the anchor card is generally the work card, and for the French, the fox or the fish card are generally the work cards. So that's a difference there. The whip can have to do with discussion and arguments and disagreements with the German, and with the whip card in the French, you do have also an idea of sports, and the idea of sexuality is also brought into the whip card, whereas sexuality is more tied to the lily card in the German system. There also, you can see the difference in the snake, where the snake has a little bit less of a negative connotation. It can be a neutral woman. and something taking a little bit longer, something taking a winding path can be in there. Whereas in the French tradition, the snake often is to do with big trouble. It's pretty much, it's a fairly negative card. So when you think about the French system, you think about Sylvie Steinbeck. I know I should have gotten the name of her book, but you can look up Sylvia Steinbeck. She has a book on Lenormand, or probably more than one book, I don't know. When you think of German, you can think of, I know there's a big thing with the Trepner course. So these are specific traditions, and you are going to get people who, you know, as with anything, I think you get very cliquey people sometimes crop up where, you know, you can't read it like that, you know, that's you're mixing the French and the German tradition, or you can't, you haven't, you know, trained under so and so, so you can't be this, you can't be that. You know, you do get some really die-hard, you know, people, just like with sports. You're gonna go, I'm a die-hard Lions fan, you know, this is just what it is, and nobody's better than I am. And so, you know, certain people, I'm sure, in tarot are gonna be like, oh, if you can't read the Thoth deck, then, you know, you really aren't reading tarot. You're kind of wimping it out by doing the Rider-Waite. You know, you always have these sort of camps that form, which it seems to be human nature. I personally wouldn't worry so much about that. I will say that with Lenormand, I do think that, especially at the beginning, that it is best to choose a specific set of meanings and stick with that as you're learning it. Now, you're going to develop your own nuances. You're going to develop some of your own meanings. And you maybe find some in the, you know, let's say you decide, okay, the German system kind of resonates with me, but I particularly like that meaning that the French tradition uses, and I'm going to kind of work that into my understanding. That's not an issue. You know, obviously we always, even with the tarot, you know, when we learn this, and we should have this basic foundation of understanding of what the cards mean traditionally, we grow and develop these different meanings as we go along, as we use them. But as a base starting point, I think that it is very smart with Lenormand to sort of pick a tradition, pick a base set of keywords, and really work with those. Because if you really start to grab from all different traditions and meanings, what can happen at the beginning when you don't have a firm grasp on things is that you can start to get muddy readings, or things can start to get muddled, because it can be so many different things. Because again, you know, we're not just talking about the child, we're talking about the child with the bouquet, the child with the whip, the child with the tower, the child with, you know, the tower and the bouquet. And if we have too many meanings going on, it's going to be very difficult to quickly start to form the sentences that are the beauty of working with Lenormand. And so so that would be my recommendation. Now, I did find a really good site which is Jace on Cards. I'll put the link in the description box below directly to, he has a page where he lists out the German traditional meanings and the French modern. I guess that's one way that they call that. So the French modern and the German traditional meanings. And again, you can probably find a million sites that may come up with different things, but this was just nice in that he has them all laid out here. I printed them out, both of them, but you know, on one page you can see a list of the German traditional, and you can see the list of the French, he calls it the French modern. And so I would recommend sort of reading through those lists perhaps, and seeing which one resonates with you, and then maybe printing those out, or adding those, you know, going through, if you print out the journal pages, you know, which I'll put a link to again in the description box below. If you print out those, you can go in through and add your meanings into that, or just however it is that you're going to keep track of it. And so that you have those sort of as a starting point in order if you're just starting to learn. And again, it doesn't mean down the road that you're not going to incorporate, and develop your own sense of meanings as you go along. But the key to this is that whatever the meanings that you prescribe to a card, that you're consistent with that, because again, that's going to produce clarity or more clarity in a reading than having too much information, too many meanings attached and differing meanings attached to a specific card in Lenormand. To start off, that's just my personal recommendation, and I have found that to work quite well with me. I kind of looked everything over at the beginning when I was deciding to start to learn Lenormand. I decided to go with the German, or stay somewhat with the German traditional meanings, and that way it just kept everything down to a few core meanings as I went to learn, and that has served me quite well, because for a little while I was starting to pull a lot more meanings in, and because just that sort of, I was doing a lot of research and oh, that's interesting, oh, that's interesting, but then again, you do just sort of get so much going on that you lose the fast quickness that is Lenormand in terms of reading, and you lose mostly you lose that quick association so that you can tie it together with different cards. So we're not just going to be laying down one card and having a long, deep discussion on this particular card. So here we have the bouquet, or also the flowers. This is to do with a positive gift, or a good surprise that's coming on, or good luck that's coming, an invitation that's going to be something positive. Okay, there we have it. We're not gonna, we're not gonna have a in-depth conversation about that. Whereas we might pull the Wheel of Fortune off of out of the tarot deck, and we can talk about all kinds of things. We can talk about the cycles of the season, the cycles of the stars as they make the path throughout the sky. We can talk about the various things that we have here guarding it. We can talk about the Sphinx up here, or the idea of fortune spinning the wheel, and that there are certain things that are outside of our control. It may be good things, it may be bad things. We can talk about the medieval Wheel of Fortune, that we can talk about that sense of sometimes you're up at the top, and don't always be too confident up there, because you're probably going to swing along at the bottom at some point. And if you're at the bottom of the pile, don't despair, because you're probably going to be coming up onto the upswing. And so you can have that idea of things, and there's all kinds of things that we can talk about. It's a fire element card, and so we can talk about that sort of the transformative power of fire. We can talk about sort of the passions and the creativity involved with fire. We can talk about those aspects. We can talk about the cycle of life and death that we get with the snake, and we get with Anubis taking the souls up into heaven. So we have that also cycle of life and death that's part of the wheel that we're all on. So there's like this whole thing, there's layers and layers and layers that we can go into. And I just got lucky because I was doing a card comparison on this, and obviously had just stuck it on top of the deck. But you can pick any tarot card and really go in as far, as deep as you want to go into. You're not really going to be doing same thing with an oracle card. You can, again, they don't have a specific traditional meaning, but there's a lot of emotion within the actual artwork itself that you can talk about, the evocative nature of this person, and the pensive quality that she looks like. She's being very pensive, and we combine that with the sense of in this particular case, it has a lot of times oracle cards will have a sentence on it, and so this is she feels and she knows, and you can really get into that sense of how when you know something deep down inside, and you can really trust that feeling and trust that instinct, and you just have that gut knowledge, and that you need to go with that, and you can just go as deep as you want with an oracle card, especially because there is no really set meaning. The author will prescribe a certain meaning, but oracle cards can be quite intuitive, and you can go quite deep, or you can go off the author's meaning. You're not going to do this You know, here's a child card. This is about a new beginning. This is about either a child, or it can be about something that's a new beginning. You know, what else are you what else are you going to say with it by itself? Because it's a Lenormand is about being with multiple cards at once and how it touches and relates to other cards. And so that is the difference, and that is why my rambling reason why I would suggest, though, that you come up with or decide on what your core meanings are going to be at the beginning and then stick with those. And you don't need to spread out into really in-depth meanings, sitting and journaling in depth about a specific card. And again, I'm sure there are people that might recommend this. This is just my particular experience with learning Lenormand, because I think that when you come to Lenormand, so let's swing it back around. So when you come to Lenormand from the place of tarot cards or oracle cards, which I'm just kind of coming out of that assumption that most people coming or watching this particular video on my channel are going to be coming from the world of tarot or oracle cards. Sometimes I had the experience of, and I have heard other people having the experience of, when they first start working with Lenormand, it just not quite clicking because of trying to read Lenormand as if it was a tarot card or as if it was an oracle card, and that's not what it is. And so you kind of have to shut off that mode of thinking so that you can really get into the voice that is Lenormand, and it's well worth it. And so that kind of brings us full circle, I guess, around to what my original question is why Lenormand? And for me, the answer to that is because it is a very different voice. I really do kind of liken, I do really think about tarot as being very deep. It has practical information. It has the deep wellspring information. You know, it has all the capacity for that sort of layered meaning. So really wanting to sit down with somebody and have a heart-to-heart. And it's like having a heart-to-heart conversation with the universe, with the collective unconscious. There's so much depth that is there. And again, this is not saying that there can't be depth found in Lenormand, but for me, I found the voice of tarot to be that sort of counseling, both, you know, positive and not negative, but sort of that, you know, we're going to deal with all the issues, but it's like a counseling session. I kind of think of with tarot. With an oracle, I kind of think of this in terms of, and again, this is just for me personally, I just think of this as sort of going to a sage, or that real sense of going to an oracle or a seer. And I don't tend to do large spreads, so I do tend to pick, you know, one card, you know, release the dark wound and let love live, and then just really sink into that card. This is a very deep message that generally is quite healing, quite supportive and affirming. I would say most oracle decks do fall along that lines of being very much about affirmation and nurturing and healing and encouragement. You get that sort of sense. And so I tend to do generally one card readings, sometimes 3 cards, although I'm going to say very rarely I'll use oracle cards in that way, but I definitely don't go beyond 3 cards with an oracle reading, because it just, for me, isn't that sort of a system. Again, this is for me, but it has that sort of sage, deep Mother Earth healing affirmation feel to an oracle card. Whereas for me, the voice of Lenormand is quite practical. And again, it can get quite deep. It can touch on the deep issues, can touch on past issues that are interfering with the present day, you know, unconscious things that are kind of interfering with the, you know, the conscious point, or the decisions and choices that we're making. You know, it has, I really don't mean this in a derogatory way. way, or in a way that limits the Lenormand. But for my personal experience, the Lenormand is so practical, and it has that really sense of sitting down with your aunt or a grandma that is kind of, let's sit down and work this out, or your friend, you know, sitting down and just with a more practical friend. Not, you know, I guess you got friends that are more the counseling type. And think about it, just like you can really think about that in terms of the cards too. You know, you have those friends that you go to that you know you're going to get really good advice from. They're going to tell you like it is. They're going to hit all bases. They're going to look at it from all aspects. But they're really going to go deep with you and really work with you on issues when you sit down and talk to them. And then sometimes you have those friends that are just the mothers. They kind of embody that sort of Mother Earth. They're going to really listen. They're going to be the one that if you really just want to cry and be, you know, have somebody hug you and say everything's going to be okay, you know, they're there for that supportiveness. And then you have the friends who are quite practical, and that when you want just straightforward, give me some advice, that's the person that you're going to go to, because they really are going to say, okay, let's look at this. You know, you start thinking about putting out the grand tableau, and it's like, okay, we're going to take a look at this. Right now it kind of looks like it's jumbled up of 36 cards, but we're going to take a look at all this and start to see the connections of things, see how these things are working together, see how this things might be blocking something else, and we need to find a way around this particular situation. You know, really kind of getting in there to the nuts and bolts of a situation. And that kind of friend is what the Lenormand is. And so I guess that would be my answer to the question of why Lenormand with these other, you know, if you already have these other systems, why would you do Lenormand? And my answer to that would be because it's a different voice. It's another voice. And I love it. I love each of these for their different voices, because they do have something different to say, and they can work quite. I have a video which I'll link to in the description box below about using all three of these in conjunction with each other. I have a reading in my Etsy shop that uses all three of them, and I love it. It really works well. It really does, because you come at whatever the question is or whatever the situation is, and you're kind of looking at it from these three different voices, and I quite love the synergy of that. So this has kind of been a twofold kind of look, you know, just let's get a firm look at what these three systems are, and looking at, taking a look at the Lenormand and kind of that question of why bother? If you're already reading tarot, why bother? You know, that could be the question of some people. And so that I did want to address that question. And I do hope that I've satisfactorily for you answered the question of why use Lenormand, or perhaps, you know, answered the question that it's really not something that you you want. It might have answered in that way for you. So I did just want it to answer that question. And also, I guess as we're moving forward, because in the next video we're going to start really looking at, okay, now we've decided we are going to, hopefully after watching this video, you have decided you do want to start to work with this particular system that is Lenormand, and to sort of keep those things in mind that we quickly talked about, just in terms of you know, keeping your meanings tight, understanding that I'm coming at Lenormand from mostly a German system. Again, I've tweaked it here and there as I've worked with the system, but for most part I'm coming at it from a German, and that's just going to show up in you know, we have significator cards. So if we're talking about work in a grand tableau, I'm going to come to the anchor card, whereas the French system might go to the fox or to the fish. So that's just important to know where I'm coming from as we go forward. The same thing if you're going to learn tarot, and I'm teaching a tutorial on how to read a specific card, and I'm coming from the Rider-Waite-Smith, and you're over here trying to make sense of it maybe with a Thoth deck. You know, we might have some things that aren't lining up because we're not coming at it from the same degree. So so I think those were important things to note as we go forward. So I hope that this was of some help to you, and I look forward to exploring the wonderful tradition that is the Lenormand card, or the Petite Lenormand.